My family abandoned my wedding for my sister's engagement to a billionaire. But as I cut the cake, Mom texted me in a panic. Her golden child's fiancé had vanished with their savings. I smiled, blocked the number, and let them face the ruin alone. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, staring at the woman reflected back at me. She looked like a bride. The white lace of the gown, an intricate design of vines and floral patterns that I had sketched myself, hugged my frame perfectly. The veil was a cascade of soft tulle, pinning back hair that had been professionally styled into elegant waves. But the eyes, those weren't the eyes of a woman about to experience the happiest day of her life. They were red-rimmed, glassy, and hollow. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. The bouquet of white roses and eucalyptus shook violently in my grip. "Claire," a soft voice came from the doorway. It was Bella, one of the few people who had actually shown up. She was dressed in the sage green bridesmaid dress I had picked out, but her face was etched with a mixture of pity and rage. "It's time. Julian is waiting." "I know," I whispered, my voice cracking. I needed a minute." "You look beautiful," Alexandra added, stepping into view behind Bella. She was my other bridesmaid, a graphic designer with a sharp eye and an even sharper tongue, usually. Today, though, she looked like she was holding back a scream. "Focus on Julian, focus on us, we love you." I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. "I know, thank you." Walking down the aisle was supposed to be a moment of triumph, a transition from one life to another. But as the doors opened and the music swelled, a beautiful string quartet rendition of a song Julian and I loved, the reality of the room hit me like a physical blow. The venue was stunning. It was a refurbished botanical garden, lush with greenery and bathed in the soft, golden hour light. It was exactly what I, a landscape architect, had always dreamed of. But the chairs, oh God, the chairs. The groom's side was full. Julian's family, his friends, his colleagues, they were all there, smiling, eager, supportive. His mother, Alice, a retired teacher with a heart of gold, was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, beaming at me with genuine pride. But my side of the aisle was a wasteland. Rows of empty white chairs stared back at me. There were gaps that felt like missing teeth in a smile. My parents weren't there. My aunts and uncles weren't there. My cousins weren't there. And most painfully, Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, the person who was supposed to be my maid of honor, was missing. They were all at Tiffany's engagement party. Every step I took toward Julian felt heavy, as if I were dragging the weight of their rejection with me. I locked eyes with him at the altar. Julian, my rock, my handsome civil engineer who saw the world in structures and stability, looked at me with such intense love and fierce protection that it almost buckled my knees. He stepped forward, breaking tradition, and met me halfway down the aisle, grabbing my hand and squeezing it tight. "I've got you," he whispered, low enough that only I could hear. "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." We got through the vows. I managed to speak the words without sobbing, focusing entirely on Julian's hazel eyes, blocking out the gaping void to my left. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was loud, Julian's side making up for the silence on mine, but it echoed strangely in the half-empty hall. We moved to the reception, a tented affair under the stars. We went through the motions. The first dance, the speeches, which were short, considering my father wasn't there to give one, and finally, the cake cutting. I held the silver knife, Julian's hand over mine. We sliced into the 3-tier vanilla bean cake, the camera flashes blinding us for a moment. As I stepped back to grab a plate, my phone, which I had left on the sweetheart table, lit up. The screen illuminated the dim space. 1 notification, then 2, then 5. It was my mother, Janice. "Mom, pick up the phone." "Mom, Claire, this is an emergency." "Mom, we need to talk." "Now." "Mom, he's gone, it's all gone." I stared at the messages, the knife still heavy in my hand. My heart didn't race with concern for them. It stopped cold. The audacity of her to demand my attention now, on this night, after what they had done, was breathtaking. Julian leaned in, kissing my temple. Everything okay? I looked up at him, and for the first time all day, a genuine, cold smile touched my lips. Better than okay, I said, my voice steady. Ray panicking. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, but looking at that phone, I realized the surgery to cut them out had already begun. The reception continued, a surreal mix of genuine joy and underlying tension. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like a perfect, intimate wedding. Julian and I moved from table to table, thanking his guests. Alice, my mother-in-law, held my hand tightly every time she came near me. "You are the daughter I always wanted," Alice told me, her voice thick with emotion as we sat for dinner. "I don't care who isn't here, Claire. You are a Wilson now, and we show up for each other." "Thank you, Alice," I choked out, squeezing her hand. "That means more than you know." But my mind kept drifting back to the phone sitting face down on the table. And back to the conversation I'd had with my mother 3 months ago. Flashback. "It's just unfortunate timing, Claire," my mother had said, casually sipping her iced tea as if she weren't detonating a bomb in my living room. "Tiffany's fiancé, Mark, is very busy. He's an international entrepreneur. This is the only weekend he could fly everyone out to the Hamptons for the engagement bash." "The Hamptons?" I had repeated, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Mom, that's my wedding weekend, you know that. The save the dates went out 6 months ago." I know, she waved a hand dismissively. "But this is Mark we're talking about. He's wealthy, Claire, very wealthy, and he wants to treat the family. He's renting a mansion. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for your sister." "So you're skipping my wedding?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For a party?" "It's not just a party, it's a networking event," my father chimed in, not even looking up from his iPad. "Mark says he has investment opportunities. We have to think about the family's future." "And Sarah?" I asked, looking at my best friend who was sitting on my couch, avoiding my eyes. "Tiffany invited me," Sarah mumbled, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. "And, well, Mark's friends are going to be there. Single, rich friends. Claire, you're already set. You have Julian, you have your career. Tiffany needs this, I need this." I had thrown them all out that day. I didn't scream. I didn't break things. I just opened the door and told them to leave. Present day. I snapped back to the present as Bella poured more champagne into my glass. "Don't look at it," she commanded, nodding toward my phone. "Whatever she wants, let her wait." "She's texting me because she needs something," I said, watching the screen light up again. "She never texts just to say hello." Alexandra leaned over, her dark eyes flashing. "Let me guess. They realize the open bar at the Hamptons isn't top shelf." "Worse, I think," I murmured. The vibration of the phone against the table felt like a heartbeat, erratic and desperate. I picked it up, not to answer, but to silence it. As I did, another message preview popped up. "Mom, he took the money from the joint account. Dad's retirement, all of it. You need to send us $5,000 for the hotel bill or they're going to call the police." Mark's card declined. I stared at the number. $5,000. To them, that was a panic-inducing amount right now. To me, it was the exact amount I had spent on the non-refundable deposit for the venue they weren't sitting in. I looked across the room at Julian, who was laughing with his college friends. He caught my eye and winked. He knew about the texts. He knew everything. What my parents and Tiffany didn't know, what they had forgotten in their blinded worship of wealth, was that my job as a landscape architect wasn't just planting flowers. I worked with high-end developers. I knew the zoning laws, the property values, and the people who actually own the land. When Mark had first appeared on the scene, bragging about his developments in Dubai and his properties in the Hamptons, I had made a few calls. Just due diligence. The results had been blank. No records, no LLCs, nothing. I had tried to warn them. I had told Tiffany, "Be careful, he doesn't exist on paper." She had laughed, calling me jealous. My mother had told me to stop trying to sabotage my sister's happiness just because I was marrying a boring civil engineer. So I had stopped. I had let them walk into the lion's den. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. The house they lived in, my childhood home, didn't belong to them anymore. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand the history. I was the eldest, the responsible one, the fixer. When my dad's hardware store went under 10 years ago, I was the one who worked 2 jobs in college to help pay the mortgage. When Tiffany got a DUI at 19, I was the one who paid for the lawyer and drove her to community service so my parents wouldn't have to face the shame. I had spent my entire adult life buying their love, or at least buying my place in the family. Tiffany, on the other hand, was the sun around which my parents orbited. She was beautiful, bubbly, and utterly helpless. She floated from job to job, barista, yoga instructor, influencer, never sticking with anything, always bailaid out by mom and dad. Or, more accurately, by mom and dad using money I had given them. Then came Mark. He appeared 6 months ago, looking like he had stepped out of a luxury car commercial. He wore Italian suits that were just a little too shiny, drove a leased Porsche, and spoke in buzzwords. Crypto, blockchain, synergy, offshore leverage. He was slick, he was charming, and he zeroed in on my parents' insecurity about money like a heat-seeking missile. "You deserve more, Janice," he would say to my mother, pouring her cheap wine he claimed was vintage. "You and Bob have worked too hard to retire on peanuts. Let me double your portfolio." I met him properly only twice. The first time was at a family dinner, where he spent the entire meal asking Julian and me invasive questions about our finances. "So, landscape architecture," Mark had said, swirling his wine glass. "Lucrative, you own your firm." "I'm a partner," I had replied curtly. "Nice, and the house. You guys own that brownstone in the city." "We do," Julian had answered, his eyes narrowing. "Why?" "Just curious," Mark had smiled, a reptilian bearing of teeth. "Real estate is the only real asset, am I right? You should leverage that. I could get you a 20% return in a month if you pulled some equity out." I had laughed in his face. "No thanks, Mark, we're good." My mother had kicked me under the table. Later, she scolded me for being rude to the first successful man Tiffany has ever dated. That was the dynamic. Mark was the savior, the lottery ticket. I was the skepticism they didn't want to hear. Sarah, my best friend, fell for it too. She was single, lonely, and tired of her receptionist job. Mark promised to introduce her to his partners. He dazzled her with promises of parties on yachts and trips to Europe. When the choice came between holding my dress while I peed or drinking champagne on a billionaire's estate in the Hamptons, Sarah didn't even hesitate. She chose the fantasy. And now, as I sat at my wedding reception, the fantasy was dissolving. I unlocked my phone and opened the group chat, the one titled The Wedding, that they had all left 2 weeks ago, but which I had re-added them to just for this moment. I typed slowly, my thumbs hovering over the glass. "Mom, Claire, we are stranded. The hotel manager is threatening to call the cops. Mark took the car keys. Send the money. Tiffany, Claire, stop being a BTCH and help us. This is all a misunderstanding. Mark is he's handling business, but we need cash for the bill. Sarah, Claire, please, I don't have enough on my card." I looked at Julian. He nodded, raising his champagne glass in a silent toast. I hit send. "Me, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm currently at my wedding reception. You know, the one you all skipped. I hope Mark returns soon. Enjoy the Hamptons." Then I turned off the phone. The morning after my wedding was silent. It was a silence I had never experienced before, heavy yet strangely cleansing. I woke up in our suite, the early morning sun filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Julian was still asleep, his arm thrown protectively over his eyes. I lay there for a long time, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in years, the constant hum of anxiety that usually accompanied thoughts of my family was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The grief I had felt walking down the aisle had evaporated the moment I sent that text message. Now, there was only strategy. I slipped out of bed and picked up my phone from the nightstand. I had silenced it, but the notifications were a scrolling wall of desperation. 43 missed calls, 82 text messages, voicemails that had filled my inbox to capacity. I didn't listen to them yet. Instead, I walked out onto the balcony, wrapping my silk robe tight against the morning chill. I needed to assess the battlefield. My family was predictable. They were reactive creatures, driven by immediate gratification and fear. Right now, they were in the fear stage. They had been abandoned by their savior, Mark, in a place they couldn't afford, with a bill they couldn't pay. But I knew what their next move would be. When panic subsided, greed would take over. They would need money, and they would look for the largest asset they thought they had access to, the house on Elm Street. My childhood home. They had lived there for 30 years. To them, it was their fortress, their piggy bank. But they had forgotten the events of 5 years ago. When my father's business finally collapsed under the weight of his mismanagement and my mother's spending habits, the bank had come for the house. They were days away from foreclosure. I had stepped in. I was 24, fresh out of my master's program, and I had used every cent of my inheritance from my grandmother, money they had tried and failed to access, to buy the house from the bank. I let them stay. I let them pretend they still owned it to save their pride in the neighborhood. I charged them a nominal rent that barely covered the property taxes, which they frequently forgot to pay. I sat down at the patio table and dialed a number. It was Sunday, but I knew she would answer. "Claire," Elena's voice was raspy with sleep. "You got married 12 hours ago. Why are you calling your lawyer?" "Because the honeymoon is over, Elena," I said, watching a bird land on the railing. "I need you to open a file." "On who?" "My parents and a man named Mark. Well, I don't know his real last name. He goes by Mark Sterling." I heard the rustling of sheets as Elena sat up. She had been at the wedding. She had seen the empty chairs. What did they do? "They're broke. Mark stranded them in the Hamptons and stole their savings. They're going to try to liquidate assets. I need you to lock down the title on the Elm Street property. Make sure the registry is flagged for any fraudulent transfer attempts. And I need a full background check on Mark Sterling. I want to know who my sister actually got engaged to." "Consider it done," Elena said, her tone shifting from sleepy friend to shark attorney. "But Claire, if they try to sell the house, that's fraud. You'd be prosecuting your own parents." "They didn't come to my wedding, Elena," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "They aren't my parents anymore. They're just tenants who are behind on rent." I hung up and went back inside. Julian was awake, propped up on his elbows, watching me. "You have that look," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What look?" "The look you get when a contractor tries to use cheap materials on a foundation," he smiled tiredly. "You're going to demolish them, aren't you?" "I'm just doing some landscaping," I replied, grabbing my purse. "I'm going to weed the garden." They didn't call the police. They didn't go to a shelter. Predictably, they bullied a cab driver into taking them all the way back to the city with the promise that their wealthy daughter would pay the fare upon arrival. It was 2:00 p.m. when I pulled up to the Elm Street house. The cab was still in the driveway, the driver standing by the open trunk, looking furious. My father was shouting at him, his face a mottled red, while my mother sat on the front porch steps, weeping into a designer handkerchief. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen, likely inside, hiding from the reality of her life. I parked my SUV and stepped out. I was still wearing my morning-after clothes, white linen trousers, and a structured blouse, looking every bit the successful professional they resented. "Claire," my father spotted me and pointed a trembling finger. "Thank God, pay this man, he's threatening to call the cops." I looked at the driver. "How much is the fare?" $450, the driver spat. Plus waiting time, they said you have cash. I opened my purse, pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, and handed them to the driver. Keep the change, get out of here. The driver didn't wait to be told twice. He threw their luggage onto the driveway, slammed the trunk, and peeled out. Silence descended on the lawn. My father looked at me, not with gratitude, but with expectation. About time, he huffed, adjusting his rumpled polo shirt. We've been through hell, Claire, absolute hell, and you ignoring your mother's texts. Do you have any idea how terrified we were? I was at my wedding, I said calmly, crossing my arms. Remember, the one you weren't at. Oh, stop being so dramatic, my mother snapped from the porch, wiping her mascara-stained eyes. We explained that. It was a business opportunity for the family, and look what happened, that monster. He took everything. The joint account, the emergency fund. He took the investment money too, my father added, his voice dropping to a whisper. $50,000, Claire, cash. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't have $50,000. We took a bridge loan, my father muttered, looking away, against the business assets. You don't have a business, I reminded him. You liquidated the hardware store 5 years ago. Against the house, Tiffany shrieked. I looked up. Tiffany was standing in the doorway, wearing a stained white dress that looked like a cheap knockoff of a bridal gown. She looked manic. Her hair was matted, and she was holding a half-empty bottle of wine. We took a loan against the house equity, Tiffany yelled, stumbling down the steps. Mark said he could triple it in a week. He needed the capital to unlock his trust fund. We signed the papers on Friday. My heart stopped for a second, then started beating. Why? A slow, heavy thud. It was exactly as I had predicted, but the sheer stupidity of it was breathtaking. You signed papers, I asked, my voice dangerously low, to take a loan against this house. Yes, my mother wailed. And now he's gone, he has the money, and the bank is going to come for us. You have to fix this, Claire. You have to talk to Julian. He has connections. We need to cover the loan before the bank finds out Mark defrauded us. I looked at the three of them. My father, the failed businessman. My mother, the enabler. My sister, the entitled brat. They stood there, demanding I clean up their mess, completely oblivious to the legal landmine they had just stepped on. I can't fix it, I said simply. You have to, Tiffany screamed, throwing the wine bottle onto the grass. You have money, you and Julian are rich. If you don't pay it, we lose the house. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that made my father flinch. You can't lose the house, Tiffany, I said, stepping closer to them, because you don't own it. My mother froze. Excuse me. I own this house, I said, enunciating every word. I bought it 5 years ago. I have the deed. I have the title. You are tenants. You have no equity. You have no right to take out a loan against it. That's just a formality, my father sputtered, his face turning purple. We're your parents, it's our house. Not legally, I said. So, if you signed loan documents using this property as collateral, you didn't just get scammed by Mark. You committed bank fraud. You forged ownership documents. The color drained from my mother's face. No, Mark handled the paperwork. He said it was just a character loan. If he used the house as collateral and you signed it claiming to be the owners, I continued, relentless, then you are going to prison. Not Mark, you. You have to help us. My mother grabbed my arm, her grip painful. You can't let them take us, just sign the house over to us. Backdate it, we can say we owned it all along. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up into her eyes. You want me to commit perjury and fraud to save you? I asked. The same people who left me standing alone at the altar yesterday. The same people who invested $50,000 in a con man, but told me they couldn't afford to contribute a dime to my wedding. I ripped my arm away. No. The following 48 hours were a blur of legal maneuvers and escalating hysteria. I didn't stay to argue with them on the lawn. I got back in my car and drove straight to Alina's office. By Tuesday morning, We had the full picture. Elena sat across from me in her conference room, sliding a thick manila folder across the mahogany table. "You were right," Elena said, her expression grim. "Mark Sterling doesn't exist, but Simon Vance does." She opened the folder to reveal a mugshot. It was him. Without the tan and the expensive suit, he looked older, harder. Simon Vance, wanted in 3 states for romance scams, wire fraud, and identity theft. He targets families with golden child dynamics. He finds the weak link, usually the one who wants to be famous or rich without working, and uses them to drain the parents. "Tiffany," I whispered, looking at the rap sheet. "Exactly, he's been working them for months," Elena continued. "And regarding the house, it's worse than we thought. They didn't go to a bank, Claire. Banks have due diligence. They went to a hard money lender. A shark. Mark set it up. The interest rate is 60%. And yes, your father forged your signature on a power of attorney document to claim he had the right to leverage the property." I felt the bile rise in my throat. My father had forged my signature. He had literally stolen my identity to give money to the man who was sleeping with my sister. "What are my options?" I asked. "Civilly, we evict them," Elena said. "Criminally, you press charges for the forgery. That invalidates the loan because it was obtained via fraud. The loan shark loses his claim on the house, but your father faces 5 to 10 years. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Sarah. I had ignored her for 2 days, but now I needed to know the enemy's state of mind. I swiped to answer and put it on speaker. "Claire," Sarah's voice was a ragged whisper. She sounded like she had been crying for days. "Claire, please don't hang up." "Talk," I said coldly. "I'm at your parents' house," Sarah sobbed. It's scary here, Claire. Your dad is tearing the walls apart looking for hidden cash he thinks your grandma left. Your mom is just sitting in the dark saying you'll fix it. And Tiffany is still texting him." "Texting who?" "Mark or Simon, whatever his name is," Sarah cried. "She thinks he's going to come back for her. She's sending him voice notes telling him to just explain everything to the police so they can run away together. She told him that you're trying to FR. Aimed him." I closed my eyes. The delusion was absolute. "And you, Sarah?" I asked. "Why are you there? Why aren't you at work?" I gave him money too," Sarah whimpered. "My car savings, $5,000. He said I could be an investor in his club in Miami. I thought if I stayed with your family, maybe you'd help us all get it back." "You chose them, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "You chose the party. You chose the billionaire. You left me alone on my wedding day because you thought you were trading up." "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I'm so sorry, I was jealous. You have everything, Julian, the house, the career. I just wanted a piece of that life." "You had a piece of my life," I said. "You had my friendship, but that wasn't enough currency for you." I signaled Elena to hand me a specific document from the file. "Sarah, listen closely," I said. "I am coming over there tonight. I am bringing the police. If you want to stay out of the indictment for conspiracy to commit fraud, you will do exactly what I say. You will get Tiffany's phone. You will screenshot every text she sent to Mark since the engagement party, and you will send them to me. Now." I can't betray her." "She betrayed you," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "She brought a predator into your life who stole your money, and you betrayed me. This is your one chance to be on the right side of history, Sarah. Do it, or I name you as an accomplice in the police report." There was a long silence, broken only by her sniffling. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll do it." I hung up. Elena looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. "You're terrifying." "I'm just protecting my investment," I said, standing up. "Come on, let's go serve an eviction notice." The drive to the house that evening felt like a funeral procession. Julian drove, his hand resting on my knee. Elena followed in her car, and behind her, a squad car I had requested to keep the peace. We pulled up. The house was dark, save for the flickering light of the television in the living room. I walked up the path, the legal documents heavy in my hand. I wasn't the daughter coming home anymore. I was the landlord coming to collect, and I was about to bring the whole rotting structure down on their heads. The front door wasn't locked. It swung open with a rusty creak that echoed through the silent neighborhood, a sound I had heard 1,000 times growing up. But tonight, it sounded like the lid of a coffin being lifted. I stepped into the foyer, flanked by Julian and Alina. Two uniformed officers stood just behind us on the porch, their radios crackling low in the humid night air. The living room was a tableau of misery. My father was pacing the rug, wearing the same clothes he had worn yesterday. My mother was slumped on the sofa, clutching a glass of wine with a shaking hand. Tiffany was curled in the armchair, scrolling frantically on her phone, while Sarah sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, looking like a ghost. "Who's there?" my father barked, spinning around. When he saw me, his face lit up with a grotesque mixture of relief and fury. "Claire, finally, did you bring the check? The lender called again. He's sending people over tomorrow morning. We have to pay the interest tonight." He didn't see the police yet. He only saw his bank account standing in the doorway. "There is no check, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "What?" He stopped pacing, his eyes bulging. "Don't play games with me, girl. This is life or death if we don't pay." "If you don't pay, you lose nothing," I interrupted, stepping further into the room. "Because you have nothing to lose." "I told you," Tiffany shrieked from the chair, throwing her phone down. "She's doing this on purpose. She wants us to suffer because she's jealous that Mark chose me." "Mark didn't choose you, Tiffany," I said, my voice deadly calm. "He chose a victim." "Shut up," Tiffany lunged up, her face twisted. "He's coming back, he's just moving assets." "He's in Mexico," Alina said, stepping forward and opening her briefcase on the coffee table. The sound of the heavy latch clicking open was like a gunshot in the room. "We tracked his IP address from the last text he sent you. He's gone, Tiffany, and he took the $50,000 your parents stole from the equity loan." "We didn't steal it," my mother cried, spilling wine on the rug. "It was an investment. It was our money." "It was my money," I corrected her, "borrowed against my house." I pulled the document Alina had prepared, the forged power of attorney, and slammed it onto the table. "Dad," I said, pointing at the signature at the bottom, "look at this. Who signed my name?" My father paled, his arrogance flickering out. I was acting in your best interest, as your father." "Who signed my name?" I repeated, louder this time. "I did," he shouted back, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "I signed it because you were being difficult. You were too busy with your little wedding to help your family secure a fortune. I did what I had to do." "That," Alina said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor, "is a confession to felony forgery and bank fraud." My father froze. He looked past me, finally seeing the uniforms in the doorway. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "Officers," I said, turning to the police. "You heard him. He admitted to forging my signature to obtain a high-interest loan from a predatory lender using my property as collateral." "Now wait a minute." My mother scrambled up, dropping her glass. It shattered, red wine bleeding into the carpet like a fresh wound. "You can't do this. We are your parents. You can't arrest your father." "You aren't my parents," I said, feeling a strange, cold peace settle over me. "Parents show up to their daughter's wedding. Parents don't steal their daughter's identity. Parents don't enable a predator to rob their children." "He's not a predator," Tiffany screamed, running toward me. "Mark loves me." "Sarah," I said, not taking my eyes off Tiffany, "show her." Sarah, who had been silent until now, stood up slowly. Her hands were trembling violently as she held out her phone. "I'm sorry, Tiff," Sarah whispered. Tiffany snatched the phone. I watched her eyes scan the screen. Sarah had sent me the screenshots earlier texts between Mark and a contact named The Shark that Mark had accidentally synced to the iPad Sarah had borrowed in the Hamptons. "Mark, the sister, is an idiot. She signed everything. Parents are greedy. I'll have the cash by midnight and dump them at the hotel. Easy, Mark." Tiffany read it once, then twice. The silence in the room was suffocating. "He called me an idiot," Tiffany whispered, her voice breaking. "He called you a mark," I said softly. "That's what you were to him, that's what you all were." "No," Tiffany dropped the phone. She looked at our parents, then at me. "But we gave him everything. Mom gave him the engagement ring Grandma left her." My stomach turned. "You gave him Grandma's ring." My mother looked down, refusing to meet my eyes. "He said he needed to get it resized, and appraised for the insurance." The betrayal was total. They hadn't just skipped my wedding, they had liquidated our history to buy a future that didn't exist. "Officers," I said, turning my back on them, "please remove these squatters from my property. I want to change the locks tonight." "Claire, no." My father lunged toward me, but Julian stepped in, his broad chest blocking my father's path. "Don't," Julian warned, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you dare touch her." The officers moved in. "Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us. We have probable cause for fraud, and the homeowner has requested your removal." "This is my house," my father roared as the officer took his arm. "I bought this house 30 years ago." "And you lost it 5 years ago," I said, watching them click the handcuffs onto his wrists. "I bought it back to give you a roof over your heads, and this is how you repaid me." The walk to the squad cars was the public humiliation they had always feared. The flashing blue and red lights had drawn the neighbors out. Mrs. Higgins from next door, who my mother had spent years trying to impress, stood in her bathrobe, watching with wide eyes as my father was guided into the back of a police cruiser. My mother followed, sobbing hysterically, begging me to stop this. Tiffany didn't get arrested, but she was removed from the property. She stood on the sidewalk, holding a trash bag of her clothes that the officers had allowed her to pack. She looked small, broken, and utterly alone. I stood on the porch, Julian's arm around my waist, and watched them go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt like I had finally cut away a gangrenous limb. It was painful, and it left a scar, but for the first time in my life, the infection was gone. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as the law dictated. Because my father had confessed in front of police officers, and because Alina was a shark, the loan was declared null and void due to fraud. The hard money lender tried to fight it, threatening to put a lien on the house, but once Alina pointed out that their client, my father, had no legal standing to offer the collateral, they backed off, turning their predatory gaze toward my father personally. He was charged with forgery, grand larceny, and identity theft. He took a plea deal to avoid a long prison sentence, serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, but the real punishment was the restitution. His retirement accounts, meager as they were garnished. His reputation in the community was incinerated. My mother avoided jail time by claiming ignorance and testifying against him, a final act of betrayal in a marriage built on shallow appearances. But without him, and without my financial support, she was destitute. She moved into a small, state-subsidized apartment 3 towns over. I heard from a cousin that she spends her days telling anyone who will listen that her ungrateful daughter stole her home. Tiffany had the hardest fall. The golden child was tarnished beyond repair. With Mark gone, he was eventually arrested in Belize 6 months later. She was left with significant credit card debt she had racked up trying to keep up with his lifestyle. She had to file for bankruptcy at 25. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, living with 3 roommates, finally learning the lesson that the world doesn't owe you a living. As for me, 3 months after the incident, Julian and I stood in the backyard of the Elm Street house, but it didn't look like the house I grew up in anymore. We had gutted it. The overgrown hedges were gone, replaced by native wildflowers and elegant stone pathways I had designed myself. The peeling paint was stripped and replaced with a warm, slate blue. Inside, we had removed the wall-to-wall carpet that smelled of my parents' neglect and restored the original hardwood floors. It was no longer the fortress of my trauma, it was just a house we were preparing to sell. You okay? Julian asked, handing me a glass of lemonade. He wiped sweat from his forehead. We had spent the morning planting the last of the hydrangeas for the staging photos. Yeah, I said, taking a sip. I am. I looked at the gate. A car pulled up. It was a modest sedan. Sarah stepped out. She didn't come to the gate. She just stood by her car, looking at us. She had sent me a letter a week ago, a long, handwritten apology detailing her regret, her jealousy, and her shame. She had returned every cent she owed me, working double shifts to do it. She wasn't asking to be my best friend again. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was just acknowledging the damage. I looked at her and I raised my hand in a small, polite wave. A wave that said, I see you, I don't hate you, but you don't belong here anymore. Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, got back in her car and drove away. Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Ready to go home. Not yet, I said, turning in his arms to face him. I have one more thing to do. I pulled out my phone. I had blocked my mother and Tiffany months ago, but I had one final message saved in my drafts. I had written it on my wedding night, but never sent it. It was a photo of Julian and me at the altar, laughing, surrounded by his family, looking genuinely, radiantly happy. I unblocked my mother's number for 10 seconds, I attached the photo, and I typed, "This is what wealth looks like. I hope the party was worth it." I hit send, then I blocked her again forever. I took Julian's hand, and we walked out of the gate, leaving the ghosts behind us. We had a life to build, and for the first time, the foundation was solid.